Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Ukraine is openly signaling that its position on a ceasefire is not locked anymore. The message coming out of Kyiv's UN representation is basically this: if the international system cannot push toward a full and unconditional stop in fighting, then Ukraine may adjust its own framework for what it is willing to accept. That is a meaningful shift in posture. It is not a request for negotiations. It is a pressure signal aimed at the diplomatic architecture around the war. On the Russian side, you are seeing something familiar but still important. Moscow is saying it is open to resuming talks from earlier formats, but it is holding firm on its core territorial demands in Donbas. So the gap is still wide. Both sides are now positioning themselves for talks that may or may not ever arrive, while continuing to escalate the conditions around those talks in real time. And that leads directly into the second major layer of today's picture. Ukraine's deep strike campaign is no longer episodic. It is now structurally embedded into the war. We are seeing Ukrainian strikes reach into high-value infrastructure across multiple Russian regions. That includes industrial facilities tied to missile electronics production in Voronezh and a satellite communications hub in the Moscow region that sits inside Russia's broader military command and control ecosystem. These are not symbolic targets. They sit in the backbone layer of Russia's strike systems, the part that connects sensors, production, and battlefield coordination. What stands out is not just that these sites are being hit, but that the geography is expanding and stabilizing. Moscow-adjacent infrastructure is now a recurring target set. That changes how Russia has to think about internal security, air defense allocation, and even civilian infrastructure resilience in and around the capital. Now step into the economic layer, because this is where the pressure is becoming harder to ignore. Russia is dealing with visible strain in its fuel system. Domestic shortages are appearing across multiple regions, and there are active discussions inside government circles about importing fuel and subsidizing prices to stabilize supply. That is a notable inversion for a major exporter of refined petroleum products. The issue is not just production, it is distribution under stress. Refinery disruptions, strike-related outages, and logistics bottlenecks are feeding into a system where availability is uneven and politically sensitive. The state can still manage headline stability, but the friction is now showing up in everyday fuel access and internal pricing pressure. At the same time, the broader energy picture is under pressure from both market forces and war dynamics. Refined product exports are declining, and refinery output has been disrupted enough that short-term stabilization measures are being actively considered. That includes policy tools that would have been hard to imagine earlier in the war cycle. Zooming out again, air defense becomes the critical balancing act underneath all of this. Russia is continuing to reinforce layered air defense around Moscow and other strategic zones. New deployments and construction activity suggest a growing emphasis on protecting high-value nodes inside the capital region. You are also seeing shorter-range systems placed in unconventional positions, including elevated urban placements near sensitive infrastructure. But the key constraint remains capacity. Air defense is not just about hardware, it is about interception volume. When multiple regions, industries, and corridors require protection at once, Russia is forced into prioritization. And prioritization means exposure somewhere else. That is exactly the space Ukraine is trying to exploit with its strike pattern. Now to the battlefield layer, but framed through its strategic function. The most consequential pressure point right now remains Kostiantynivka in eastern Ukraine. This is not a rapid breakthrough situation. It is a slow compression environment. Russian forces are using infiltration tactics, small unit movement, and urban masking to gradually expand contested zones inside and around the city. Ukrainian forces describe the area as partially gray, meaning control is fragmented rather than clearly defined. There are reports of Russian personnel embedded within parts of the urban space, while Ukrainian forces continue holding key defensive positions. What matters here is not speed, but direction. Kostiantynivka sits on a broader operational axis that leads toward remaining Ukrainian strongholds deeper in Donetsk. If pressure continues to build here, It is less about immediate capture and more about shaping the conditions for later operational movement. Nearby urban centers like Sloviansk and Kramatorsk are experiencing a different form of pressure. Not rapid advances, but sustained attritional stress. Air-delivered glide bombs, drone activity, and repeated infrastructure strikes are driving evacuation patterns and reducing the functional stability of these cities over time. It is a long-duration squeeze rather than a quick territorial shift. Now shift into intelligence and internal security, because the parallel war layer is very active. Ukrainian security services report the detention of individuals allegedly tied to Russian intelligence networks, including plans involving sabotage operations inside Kyiv. These alleged plots include the use of improvised devices and coordinated escape routes through third countries. On the Russian side, security services continue to report arrests of individuals accused of assisting Ukrainian intelligence activity, including surveillance of military infrastructure. These cases are difficult to independently verify in full detail, but they reflect a sustained counterintelligence environment where both sides are actively trying to penetrate each other's internal systems. There is also a growing information warfare dimension. Coordinated online networks linked to pro-Russian messaging are continuing efforts to inject synthetic narratives into European political discourse. The goal is not persuasion in a traditional sense. It is fragmentation, amplifying disagreements and making alliance coordination more expensive and slower. Now to Belarus, which continues to sit in a supporting but increasingly relevant role. Ukraine is publicly pressuring Belarus over infrastructure it claims is being used to support Russian strike operations, including relay and communication systems tied to drone coordination. At the same time, there is growing attention on Belarus's logistical relationship with Russia, including fuel and energy flows that appear to have increased significantly over the past year. This creates a quiet but important layer of interdependence that extends Russia's war sustainment network beyond its own borders. Finally, one maritime incident that adds another layer to the expanding geography of the conflict. A Russian drone strike reportedly hit a civilian cargo vessel operating in the Black Sea under foreign flag registry. The strike resulted in casualties and forced crew evacuation. While this is not the first maritime disruption in the wider theater, it reinforces how far beyond land battle lines the war environment now extends. Commercial shipping, insurance risk, and port access are increasingly part of the operational picture. On the alliance and diplomatic side, there is also friction showing up inside Europe. A political dispute between Poland and Ukraine over historical memory and military symbolism has escalated into a symbolic diplomatic gesture involving state honors. While leadership on both sides has tried to contain the fallout, it highlights how historical grievances can still inject instability into wartime coalition dynamics. At the same time, European discussions around military support continue, including movement toward localized production of air defense interceptors under U.S.-linked licensing frameworks. That shift matters because it signals a move away from purely donation-based support toward industrial integration inside Europe and potentially Ukraine itself. Thanks for listening and for being part of this community. If you want to support the show, leaving a review or a thoughtful comment helps others discover it. We also share a daily written intel brief on Substack, restrictedhandling.substack.com, where we go deeper on Russia and China, along with broader coverage of Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Wishing you a great day ahead.